February 9th, 971 AD. A longhouse in Iceland during a brutal cold snap. Outside temperature has dropped to -42 degrees Celsius. Inside the poorly insulated structure, temperature is hovering around -5 degrees. A family of 8 huddles under their wool blankets and fur covers trying to sleep. But 3 nights ago, the turf roof developed a leak during a thaw, and water dripped onto the sleeping platform, soaking the straw mattress layer before anyone noticed. The family didn't replace the wet straw. Replacing it meant going outside in the storm to fetch dry straw from storage, and they thought they could wait until morning. That wet straw conducted cold directly from the frozen wooden bench into their bodies all night. By morning, the youngest child, a 4-year-old girl, is dead from hypothermia. She died, sleeping pressed against her mother's body, surrounded by wool, blankets, and furs, because the wet straw beneath her created a thermal bridge that drained her body heat faster than she could generate it. Her core temperature dropped to 32 degrees Celsius while everyone slept. The mother wakes to find her daughter's body rigid and blue. Here's what nobody tells you about Viking sleeping arrangements. Popular culture shows cozy scenes of families wrapped in furs, sleeping peacefully by roaring fires. The reality was a nightly battle against hypothermia, where one construction mistake, wet bedding, insufficient insulation, a gap in your fur covering, could kill you while you slept. Modern people in heated homes fundamentally cannot comprehend what it means to sleep in an environment where indoor temperature regularly drops below freezing. Your breath freezes into ice crystals on your blankets. The moisture from your sleeping body condenses and freezes, creating ice layers in your bedding. The wall, 3 feet from your bed, has frost on the inside. You can literally die in your sleep from cold, despite being wrapped in multiple layers, because if those layers are constructed wrong or become wet, they transform from insulation into death traps that conduct heat away from your body. What I'm about to show you isn't some romantic story about rustic beds. This was precision thermal engineering, where every layer, from the straw foundation to the wool blankets to the fur coverings, served a specific function based on principles of heat transfer, moisture management, and insulation physics. Vikings developed bedding systems so sophisticated that they kept people alive through winters, where indoor temperatures stayed below 0 for months. But these systems were as unforgiving as they were effective. Get the layer order wrong, and you froze. Let your bedding become wet, and you died. Fail to maintain proper pest control, and parasites would literally eat you alive in your sleep, creating wounds that became infected and fatal. Sleep too close to the wall, and you'd wake with frostbite. Sleep too far from other people, and you'd lose the shared body heat that made survival possible. Stay with me, because the first secret to understanding Viking beds isn't about materials. It's comprehending the lethal environment they were designed to protect against. Let me describe what it actually felt like inside a Viking longhouse at night during winter. Because until you understand this environment, you can't appreciate the engineering required for the bedding system. The longhouse was simultaneously the safest place you could be, and a space that would seem uninhabitable by modern standards. The temperature inside was typically 10 to 20 degrees Celsius warmer than outside, which sounds good until you realize outside was -30 degrees, meaning inside was still -10 to -20 degrees in the coldest areas. The air was thick with smoke from the central hearth, because there was no proper chimney, just a hole in the roof that couldn't be too large, or it would let out all the heat. The smoke concentration would violate every modern air quality standard. Visibility was measured in meters, not tens of meters. Your eyes burned constantly. Your throat was perpetually irritated. Breathing was uncomfortable. But the alternative, clean air with more ventilation, meant freezing to death. The atmospheric conditions created a stratified environment. Cold, dense air pooled on the floor, creating a zone, perhaps 30 centimeters high, where temperature was absolutely lethal. often matching outside temperature because cold air seeped through the floorboards from the frozen ground below. From 30 centimeters to about 1 meter height was the habitable zone, where temperature might be around 0 to 5 degrees Celsius, cold but survivable, with proper clothing and bedding. Above 1 meter height, warm air and smoke accumulated, creating temperatures that could reach 15 to 20 degrees Celsius near the ceiling. But the smoke there was so thick, you couldn't breathe it. This meant the sleeping platforms, the wide benches running along both walls, had to be positioned at exactly the right height. Too low and you slept in the death zone. Too high and you suffocated in smoke. The typical platform height was 60 to 80 centimeters, a compromise between thermal comfort and breathable air. The moisture conditions were equally brutal. During cooking and when people breathed, water vapor filled the air. This vapor condensed on cold surfaces, the walls, the ceiling beams, any metal objects. In extreme cold, this condensation froze instantly, creating ice buildup on the inside of the structure. The walls themselves were constantly damp in many regions. Turf walls, common in Iceland and Greenland, because they provided excellent insulation, absorbed moisture like sponges, creating perpetual dampness that smelled of rotting earth and mold. This dampness meant everything in the house was perpetually moist: clothing, stored food, bedding materials. Dry wool absorbed this ambient moisture, becoming noticeably heavier over days. Preventing your bedding from becoming saturated required constant vigilance and maintenance. Once bedding became truly wet, either from roof leaks, condensation, or body moisture accumulation, it transformed from life-saving insulation into a death trap that would kill you through conductive heat loss, faster than you could warm it with body heat. The sleeping platforms themselves were simple wooden benches, thick planks supported by posts driven into the earthen floor or built into the wall structure. These benches were typically 1.5 to 2 meters wide, running the entire length of the longhouse, sometimes 15 to 20 meters long in large structures. The wood was always freezing cold because it was in constant thermal contact with the frozen floor and walls. Lie directly on that wood, and hypothermia would set in within minutes, as heat conducted from your body into the cold thermal mass of the wood, faster than your metabolism could replace it. The entire multi-layer bedding system existed to break this thermal bridge, to create insulating air gaps between your body and the frozen wood that wanted to steal your heat. Every material choice, every layer arrangement, every maintenance protocol was calculated against one metric: preventing conductive heat loss while managing moisture that would destroy insulation. Get this wrong, and you'd wake up cold, sick, or not at all. Can you imagine trying to sleep when failure in your bed construction could mean literal death before morning? But beds were useless without the central heating source that made indoor survival possible, and that source was as dangerous as it was essential. The langeld, the long hearth running down the center of the longhouse, was the difference between life and death, but it was also a constant threat that could kill you in multiple ways. This wasn't a fireplace as modern people understand it. It was an elongated fire trench, typically 10 to 15 meters long and half a meter wide, burning continuously for months at a time. The engineering was both brilliant and terrifying. By distributing fire along a line rather than concentrating it in one point, Vikings heated the entire elongated structure more evenly. Family groups sleeping along both walls each had a hearth section nearby providing localized heat. But this meant the entire longhouse had an open fire, burning constantly, with no protective barriers, surrounded by flammable materials, in a structure where visibility was reduced by smoke. House fires that killed entire families were regular catastrophes. The fuel management was constant work. A continuously burning hearth consumed enormous quantities of wood, approximately 2 to 3 cubic meters per week during the coldest months. Someone had to maintain the fire constantly, adding logs, managing airflow, preventing it from either dying out or burning too intensely. Let the fire die completely, and relighting it in a smoke-filled, dark, freezing environment could take hours using flint and steel, during which temperature would plummet and people could literally freeze. But burn it too hot, and you'd waste precious fuel reserves that had to last until spring. The person on fire duty walked a constant tightrope between too much and too little, knowing either extreme could be fatal. Children as young as 7 or 8 were trained in fire management because everyone had to be capable of keeping the family alive. The smoke was the price of heat. Without a proper chimney, smoke filled the entire living space. The concentration varied with wind conditions, fuel moisture, and atmospheric pressure, but it was always present. Archaeological analysis of skeletal remains shows Vikings suffered epidemic rates of chronic respiratory disease, lung tissue damage, chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and carbon deposits in airways are found in nearly every examined skeleton from the era. People were literally being slowly poisoned by the very fire that kept them alive. The black soot that coated everything wasn't just dirty. It was toxic combustion products that included carcinogenic compounds. Women who spent most time near the hearth cooking showed the worst lung damage. Children breathed this contaminated air during critical development years. Life expectancy was significantly reduced by respiratory failure. But the alternative, freezing to death in clean air, meant everyone accepted slow poisoning as the price of immediate survival. The hearth's heat distribution created the thermal zones that dictated sleeping arrangements. The warmest area was immediately beside the hearth, maybe 2 meters away. But this area was too smoky to sleep in and posed fire risk. The optimal sleeping zone was 4 to 6 meters from the hearth, far enough to breathe, close enough to benefit from radiant heat. Families competed for these prime positions based on social hierarchy. The chieftain and his family slept in the warmest zone. Lower status families slept farther from heat, meaning colder nights and higher mortality. Social position literally determined survival rates through winter because your sleeping location relative to the hearth directly affected your likelihood of freezing. Slaves and the very poor slept in the coldest areas and died at far higher rates. This wasn't just uncomfortable. It was structural violence built into the architecture where heat was a resource distributed by social class. The hearth also created the daily rhythm of thermal cycling. During the day when people were active and the fire was maintained hot for cooking, interior temperature could reach 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in central areas, almost comfortable. But at night, to conserve fuel, the fire was banked. Coals were covered with ash to create slow smolder rather than active flame. As the fire reduced, temperature dropped. By pre-dawn hours, the coldest part of the night, interior temperature could plummet to minus 10 degrees, or worse. Your body had to survive this thermal cycling every 24 hours. The bedding system had to provide enough insulation that you stayed alive through the coldest pre-dawn period when the hearth was at minimum output. This was the design specification. Keep a sleeping human alive at minus 10 degrees ambient temperature using only materials available in 10th century Scandinavia. The answer started with the foundation layer that most people never even noticed because it was hidden under everything else. Picture the most critical component of Viking bed engineering, and it's something modern people would never guess. A thick layer of dried straw stuffed into coarse fabric bags or simply piled loose on the wooden sleeping platform. This seems primitive until you understand the thermal physics that made straw mattresses not just useful but absolutely essential for surviving freezing nights. Straw isn't chosen because it's cheap or available, though it is both. It's chosen because its hollow tubular structure creates insulating air pockets in a way no other medieval material could match. Let me explain why straw saved more lives than any other single bedding component. The physics of thermal insulation is based on trapping air. Air has extremely low thermal conductivity, about 0.024 watts per meter Kelvin, which means it resists heat flow remarkably well. The problem is that air in open spaces circulates through convection, carrying heat away. The solution is trapping air in tiny spaces too small for convection to occur. This is exactly what hollow straw stems do. Each dried straw stem is a tube, perhaps 2 millimeters in diameter with walls maybe half a millimeter thick. The hollow center traps motionless air. When you pile straw in a thick layer, typically 20 to 30 centimeters deep, you create millions of these tiny air-trapping tubes oriented randomly. The total insulating effect is extraordinary. A 30-centimeter straw layer has an R value, thermal resistance, of approximately 3 to 4, comparable to modern fiberglass insulation, half that thickness. But straw's genius goes beyond simple insulation. It also manages moisture through capillary action and evaporation. A sleeping human body releases approximately 40 to 60 grams of water vapor per hour through breathing and perspiration. That's almost half a liter over 8 hours of sleep. This moisture has to go somewhere. If it condenses in your bedding, you're creating thermal bridges that defeat insulation and potentially freezing yourself. Straw absorbs this moisture into its porous structure, wicking it away from your body and distributing it throughout the mattress volume, where it can eventually evaporate. A properly dried straw mattress can absorb several liters of moisture before becoming noticeably damp. This moisture buffering was the difference between waking dry or waking soaked in a bed that had turned into an ice block. But this moisture absorption created a maintenance burden. Straw, saturated with absorbed moisture, lost its insulating properties and began rotting, creating toxic mold that caused respiratory disease. The straw had to be regularly aired, carried outside on any day with dry weather, shaken out to release absorbed moisture, dried in sun or wind, then returned. This maintenance happened weekly in humid conditions, monthly in dry winter cold. Fail to do this, and your mattress became a sodden, rotting, mold-infested health hazard. The straw filling had to be contained somehow, or it would migrate and create bare spots. The typical approach was stuffing dried straw into large bags made from coarse cloth, usually cheap, rough-woven wool or linen, too coarse for clothing. These bags were approximately 1.5 meters by 2 meters, stuffed with 10 to 15 kilograms of dried straw, then sewn shut. Creating a straw mattress meant making 3 to 4 of these bags and laying them side by side on the sleeping platform. The result was a thick, resilient, slightly springy sleeping surface that compressed under body weight to perhaps 15 to 20 centimeters thick. This wasn't soft by modern standards. The straw was firm. You could feel the stems through the cloth. It rustled with every movement. But softness was never the goal. Thermal protection was everything. The compressed straw under your body maintained about 10 to 15 centimeters of insulating layer between you and the frozen wood platform. That layer kept you alive. The straw quality mattered enormously. Premium straw was rye or wheat stems harvested during dry weather, thoroughly dried before storage, and kept in waterproof storage areas throughout winter. This straw retained maximum strength and absorbency. Poor quality straw, harvested wet, stored damp, or old and brittle, broke down rapidly, compressed into useless powder, and couldn't maintain loft. The difference between good and bad straw could be 10 degrees of insulation effectiveness, which, in a minus 15-degree environment, meant the difference between surviving the night comfortably versus waking hypothermic. Families treated straw storage as seriously as grain storage because it was equally essential for winter survival. Can you imagine calculating whether to use a bale of straw for livestock bedding or family mattresses, knowing that the wrong choice could mean someone freezes? But straw alone wasn't enough. It stopped conductive heat loss downward, but you needed additional layers above to prevent convective heat loss upward and to manage the moisture your body constantly produced. Wool, specifically sheep's wool in its minimally processed natural state, was the miracle fiber that made Viking survival possible. Modern people think of wool as just another fabric, but in medieval Scandinavia, it was the difference between life and death, and Vikings understood its properties so well that they used it in ways that modern textile engineers are only now fully appreciating. Let me explain why wool could keep you alive when every other material would kill you. The secret lies in wool's unique molecular structure and the natural oils that coat each fiber. Wool fibers are covered in lanolin, a waxy substance secreted by sheepskin. Modern wool is heavily washed to remove this lanolin because it feels greasy and smells distinctive. Vikings did the opposite. They deliberately preserved maximum lanolin content because this natural coating made wool water-resistant. Water droplets beaded up and rolled off lanolin-rich wool instead of soaking in. But more importantly, wool has a property almost no other natural fiber possesses. It maintains insulating ability even when wet. This sounds impossible, but it's real physics. Wool fibers are crimped and kinked at microscopic level, creating countless tiny air pockets. Even when the fiber itself absorbs water, and wool can absorb up to 30% of its weight before feeling damp to touch. These crimped structures maintain air pockets that provide insulation. Cotton or linen, when wet, loses nearly all insulating value and conducts heat away rapidly. Wool, when wet, still provides about 70% of its dry insulating capacity. This difference determined whether you survived sweating in your sleep during a nightmare or died from hypothermia caused by your own perspiration. The hygroscopic property, wool's ability to absorb moisture vapor, created a self-regulating moisture management system. As your body released water vapor through the night, the wool blanket layer absorbed it, pulling it away from your skin surface. This kept your skin relatively dry, preventing the evaporative cooling that causes hypothermia. The absorbed moisture spread throughout the wool fiber volume, where it eventually evaporated into room air. A thick wool blanket could absorb half a liter of moisture over a night without feeling wet, creating a buffer that prevented moisture buildup against your skin. This was unconscious climate control. You slept warm and dry without even knowing the wool was performing this moisture transport function. But once the wool became saturated beyond its buffering capacity, if you were sick with fever and sweating heavily, or if ambient humidity was extreme, the system could be overwhelmed. Saturated wool lost its effectiveness, and you'd wake cold and damp. The blanket construction used a technique called felting or fulling that modern people barely understand. Raw wool was woven into fabric, then deliberately beaten and agitated in hot water. This process caused the microscopic scales on wool fibers to interlock, creating a dense, matted fabric that was windproof and water-resistant. This felted wool, called vadmal in Old Norse, was the primary blanket material. The fabric was thick, heavy, stiff when new, and almost impervious to wind. A vadmal blanket prevented convective heat loss caused by air movement. Even when cold air infiltrated the longhouse through wall gaps, the vadmal blocked it from reaching your body, maintaining the warm microclimate between your skin and the blanket. The blankets were huge, typically 2 meters by 2.5 meters. Because Vikings didn't sleep under blankets like modern people, they wrapped themselves completely in the wool, creating a cocoon with only face exposed. This wrapping technique trapped body heat in the wool layers, while allowing just enough air circulation around the face for breathing. The blanket weight was substantial. A proper vadmal blanket weighed 5 to 8 kilograms. Modern people find this oppressive, but the weight served critical functions. It held the blanket tight against your body, eliminating air gaps where cold could penetrate. It compressed the wool slightly, optimizing the balance between loft for air trapping and density for wind resistance. And psychologically, the weight was comforting. The pressure created a sense of security and warmth. Multiple blankets could be layered for extreme cold. A wealthy family might have 3 or 4 blankets per person, each providing approximately 2 to 3 degrees of additional temperature retention. Layering created air gaps between blanket layers that added insulation beyond what the wool itself provided. But blankets alone still left one critical vulnerability. They couldn't prevent cold drafts from penetrating underneath where you contacted the straw mattress. For that, Vikings needed a waterproof, windproof barrier layer that only one material could provide: animal skin. Imagine sleeping in an environment where the walls have frost on the inside and cold air seeps through gaps in the wood structure constantly. Your wool blankets provide excellent insulation above you, but cold air flowing across the sleeping platform and seeping up through the straw mattress undermines everything. You need a windproof barrier that prevents air movement while also blocking any moisture from below. The solution is animal hides, specifically fur-bearing mammals like sheep, reindeer, seal, or bear, processed into leather but retaining the fur layer. These skins served dual purpose as both underlayer protection and top-layer covering, and understanding which position to use them in was knowledge that saved lives. The most common configuration was sheepskin placed fur side up, directly on top of the straw mattress. You slept on the fur surface, with the leather backing underneath. The dense fur, thousands of individual hairs creating a thick mat, provided cushioning and warmth. More importantly, the leather backing created an impermeable barrier between you and the straw below. If moisture was wicking up from below, ground dampness, condensation, or water from a roof leak, the leather blocked it, preventing it from reaching the wool blankets above. The leather's smooth surface was also easier to keep clean than straw or wool. Bodily fluids, dirt, and debris could be wiped off leather, whereas they'd penetrate into porous materials. This hygiene barrier reduced disease transmission in sleeping areas where multiple people slept in close contact. Alternative configuration was placing fur skins on top of wool blankets as the outermost covering layer, fur facing inward against your body. This created maximum warmth because the fur trapped a thick layer of still air directly against skin. Sleeping under a bearskin or reindeer hide with fur inward was extraordinarily warm, perhaps the warmest possible sleeping arrangement using medieval materials. The dense fur layer could add 10 to 15 degrees of effective temperature retention. The leather backing facing outward served as a windproof shell that blocked drafts completely. Even strong wind flowing through the longhouse couldn't penetrate the leather barrier to reach the insulating wool layers below. This configuration was preferred during the absolute coldest periods when survival required maximum insulation. The disadvantage was weight. A full bearskin could weigh 15 to 20 kilograms, creating a crushing sensation that some people found claustrophobic. But when exterior temperature was minus 40 degrees, that weight was welcome. The fur types varied dramatically in quality and cost, creating a status hierarchy visible in who slept under what. Premium furs were bear, wolf, or reindeer. Large animals with thick, dense fur providing exceptional insulation. Bear fur was especially prized because the guard hairs and underfur combination created insulation superior to any other available material. A bear fur could keep you warm in conditions that would kill someone under sheepskin. Wolf fur was valued for its warmth-to-weight ratio, incredibly warm but lighter than bear. Reindeer fur had unique properties where each individual hair was hollow, creating air-filled tubes that provided extraordinary insulation. Archaeological finds show reindeer fur was specifically used for extreme cold weather gear and bedding. These premium furs were expensive and rare, A single bearskin could cost the equivalent of a year's harvest for a small farm. Only wealthy chieftains and their families slept under bear or wolf furs. Middle-tier furs were sheepskin, goat, and domestic animal hides. These were far more accessible. Every household that raised livestock had access to skins when animals were slaughtered. Sheepskin was the standard sleeping fur for most Vikings. The wool layer provided decent insulation, though not comparable to wild animal furs. Multiple sheepskins could be sewn together to create larger sleeping covers. A family of moderate means might have enough sheepskins to cover their sleeping platform and provide individual covers for children. The bottom tier was sealskin and fishskin in coastal areas. Sealskin with fur removed provided excellent waterproofing but minimal insulation. It was primarily used as underlayer moisture barrier. Fish skins, particularly from large species like cod, could be processed into leather used for various purposes, though rarely for sleeping directly on, due to smell and texture. But all these layers, straw, wool, fur, still didn't address one final comfort element that separated mere survival from actual rest. Pillows seem like a pure luxury in a survival context, but Vikings understood something modern people miss. Head and neck position during sleep affects whole body thermal comfort and health. A head lying flat on a hard surface creates pressure points that disrupt blood flow, causing numbness and forcing position changes that break sleep. More critically, in a smoke-filled environment, keeping your head elevated meant breathing relatively cleaner air because smoke concentrated in upper layers while floor-level air was clearest. The pillow wasn't luxury. It was survival technology that improved sleep quality enough to matter for next-day function. Let me explain the hierarchy of pillow materials that ranged from simple straw rolls to down-filled luxury items worth a fortune. The basic pillow was identical construction to the mattress, straw stuffed into a cloth bag, but smaller. A typical straw pillow was maybe 30 centimeters by 40 centimeters, stuffed with 1 to 2 kilograms of dried straw or grass. This provided firm support that elevated the head about 10 to 15 centimeters. The straw was somewhat scratchy and rustled with movement, but it was free and universally available. Everyone from slaves to chieftains had at least a straw pillow because the materials cost nothing. The maintenance was identical to mattress straw. It needed regular replacement as it compressed and absorbed odors. Moss was an alternative filling material available in boggy regions. Dried sphagnum moss was softer than straw, less rustly, and had better moisture absorption. Moss pillows were preferred when available, but required more effort to gather and dry the moss properly. The middle tier was wool-filled pillows, using the same wool as blankets, either loose wool fiber or wool fabric scraps. Wool pillows were softer than straw, retained loft better, and had the same moisture management properties as wool blankets. They were more expensive because wool had competing uses. It could be spun into thread and woven into valuable fabric, so using raw wool as pillow stuffing was dedicating a resource that had alternative economic value. Wool pillows were markers of moderate wealth, a family prosperous enough to allocate wool to comfort rather than necessity. The pillowcase for wool pillows was typically linen rather than coarse cloth. Linen's smooth surface was more comfortable against skin and easier to wash than wool. The luxury tier was down and feather-filled pillows that represented genuine wealth. Down, the fluffy underlayer of waterfowl feathers, is extraordinarily light and warm, with exceptional loft recovery. A down pillow could be compressed completely flat, then spring back to full volume when released. The insulating properties were legendary. Down trapped more air per gram than any other natural material. Eider down, collected from eider duck nests, was the premium version, softer and warmer than goose down. Collecting eider down required accessing seabird nesting colonies, and carefully harvesting the down the birds used to line their nests. This labor-intensive process, plus the limited supply, meant eider down was worth its weight in silver. Archaeological finds from wealthy burial sites, like the Oseberg ship burial, show pillows filled with eider down, covered in fine linen, embroidered with intricate patterns. These weren't just comfort items. They were wealth displays and status symbols that were mentioned in wills and given as prestigious gifts. The pillow position and the sleeping arrangement required thought. Placed directly on the straw mattress, the pillow could shift and move. The solution was creating a slight depression or alcove in the straw where the pillow nested securely. Some platforms had a wooden headboard or raised edge at one end that prevented pillows from sliding off during sleep. The pillow was often shared between two people, sleeping side by side. Couples or parent and child would share a single larger pillow with heads touching. This sharing conserved materials but also had the thermal benefit of keeping heads close together. So exhaled breath warmed the shared airspace around both faces, preventing the nose and cheek cooling that made sleep uncomfortable in freezing conditions. The complete bed assembly, straw mattress, sheepskin layer, wool blankets, fur covering, pillow, represented substantial material investment. For a single sleeping position, you needed approximately 15 kilograms of dried straw, 1 to 2 sheepskins, 2 to 3 wool blankets, totaling 15 to 20 kilograms of processed wool, possibly a fur covering of 5 to 10 kilograms, and a pillow. The total material value was equivalent to several months of labor for an average family. This investment had to be maintained and protected because replacing it was expensive and time-consuming. But there was one more element that made Viking beds fundamentally different from modern sleeping. They weren't individual spaces. They were communal sleeping platforms where privacy didn't exist, but collective warmth made survival possible. Modern people sleep in individual beds in separate rooms with doors that close. Vikings slept in groups on communal platforms with zero physical privacy. And this wasn't a quirk of their culture. It was thermal engineering that used human bodies as heating elements in an integrated survival system. The sleeping benches weren't divided into individual beds. They were continuous platforms running the entire wall length, sometimes 15 to 20 meters long, where entire extended families slept side by side, literally touching for the entire night. This communal sleeping served multiple critical functions that go beyond simple space efficiency. Let me explain why sleeping alone would have been essentially suicidal in Viking winter conditions. The thermomathematics of communal sleeping are straightforward. An individual human body generates approximately 100 watts of heat through metabolism during sleep. One person alone, in a cold environment, struggles to maintain core temperature because their heat generation barely compensates for heat loss through radiation, convection, and conduction. But two people pressed together share one contact surface where their bodies touch, effectively halving the exposed surface area from that direction while doubling the heat generation in that shared space. The temperature between two touching bodies can be 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding air. Scale this up to 8 or 10 people sleeping in a tight row, and you've created a biological heating mass where the interior positions are substantially warmer than the exterior. Families arrange sleeping positions strategically. Infants, young children, elderly, and sick people were placed in the center positions, surrounded by healthy adults whose higher metabolic rates generated maximum heat. The edge positions, coldest because they had more exposed surface area, were taken by young, healthy adults who could tolerate more cold stress. The sleeping position was typically on your side in tightly packed rows, where you were literally pressed against the person in front and behind you. There was no rolling over. The person behind you prevented that. Movement meant disturbing everyone in your section of the sleeping platform, so people learned to sleep still. This restriction sounds uncomfortable until you realize that movement during sleep is often a response to being too warm. When you're sleeping in an environment hovering around 0 degrees, you're not too warm, and you naturally sleep more motionlessly. The body contact also meant shared blankets were more effective. Instead of each person having separate covers, the entire family group might sleep under 2 or 3 massive blankets that stretched across all of them. The shared blanket created one large insulated envelope rather than multiple small ones, reducing the total surface area, losing heat. The social and psychological aspects of communal sleeping created both benefits and stresses that modern people would find intolerable. Privacy was utterly impossible. Everyone could hear everyone else breathing, coughing, snoring, passing gas, talking in sleep. Couples attempting intimacy had to do so knowing that everyone around them was aware. Children witnessed adult activities they'd be shielded from in modern society. The sick and dying spent their final nights surrounded by the family in full sensory contact with suffering. But this lack of privacy created powerful social bonds and awareness. You knew immediately if someone was sick because their breathing changed. You felt if a child's body temperature was too high, indicating fever. You noticed if someone stopped breathing during the night. This constant mutual awareness probably saved lives. Medical emergencies were detected immediately, rather than someone dying alone in a separate room. The communal sleeping created enforced empathy. You couldn't ignore others' suffering when you were literally pressed against them. The safety benefit was also significant. A longhouse full of sleeping people was difficult to attack or rob without waking someone. Any unusual noise or movement would disturb the light sleepers who'd wake others. This collective vigilance provided security in an era when violence was common. The flip side was that feuds or conflicts between family members became unbearable when you had to sleep touching the person you hated. There are saga references to feuds escalating because people forced to sleep side by side each night couldn't escape the constant physical reminder of their animosity. But separating was rarely an option, because that meant losing the shared warmth that might mean the difference between surviving winter and freezing. The bed maintenance in this communal system required coordinated household labor. The straw mattresses had to be completely removed from platforms, carried outside, emptied, the straw dried or replaced, the bags refilled, and everything reassembled. This was heavy physical work requiring multiple people. The sheepskins had to be dragged outside and beaten to remove dirt and dead skin cells. The wool blankets needed airing in sun and wind. All of this happened on any day with favorable weather, sunny and dry or cold and windy, conditions that allowed moisture to evaporate from bedding materials. Women organized these household work parties where all the bedding was stripped, processed, and replaced in a single day of intensive labor that happened weekly in humid seasons, monthly in dry winter. The pest control was constant war against parasites that inevitably infested bedding. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, ticks, all thrived in the warm environment of occupied beds. These weren't just annoying. They transmitted disease, caused infections from scratching bites, and made sleep difficult. The Vikings fought back using herbal repellents. Dried tansy, wormwood, bog rosemary, and other aromatic plants were scattered throughout straw mattresses and sewn into fabric sachets placed in bedding. These plants contained natural insecticidal compounds. Tansy has pyrethrins. Wormwood has absinthiol, both toxic to insects. The bitter aroma permeated the sleeping area. Archaeological analysis of bedding fragments shows these herbs were standard practice, not occasional use. The battle was never won. Parasites were constant, but the herbs reduced populations to tolerable levels. The alternative without herbal control was scratching yourself bloody every night from bites, developing skin infections, and potentially contracting typhus or other flea-borne diseases that killed as surely as cold. We see that Viking beds were sophisticated multi-layer thermal engineering systems where every component, from straw foundation to wool blankets to fur coverings, served specific functions based on principles of man: insulation, moisture management, and heat retention. The communal sleeping arrangements weren't primitive overcrowding, but calculated use of human bodies as heating elements. The maintenance protocols weren't just hygiene, but essential survival tasks that prevented both hypothermia and disease. What looks like simple bedding was actually complex technology that kept people alive through conditions that would kill modern humans within hours. Vikings proved that surviving extreme cold doesn't require modern technology. It requires deep understanding of materials, acceptance of discomfort, and willingness to sacrifice privacy for collective warmth. Want to discover more lost survival technologies that ancient people used to conquer environments modern technology barely handles? Subscribe to Medieval Spirits right now. We're uncovering forgotten knowledge that proves human ingenuity can overcome any challenge when survival depends on it. Join us as we explore how Inuit peoples created warm sleeping platforms from snow blocks using only fur and body heat. How medieval alpine communities survived in wooden huts at 3,000-meter elevations through -40-degree winters. How ancient Siberian nomads developed portable bedding systems that worked in the most extreme cold on Earth. These aren't just historical curiosities. They're proven survival solutions tested through millennia. The Vikings showed that simple materials plus deep understanding plus communal cooperation can create warmth in killing cold. What other ancient survival secrets could save your life when modern heating fails? Find out on Medieval Spirits. Hit subscribe, because the past isn't primitive. It's a library of survival knowledge that might be essential when our comfortable world fails and we're translating it one video at a time.